What geography fact blows your mind? Palm trees grow in Ireland, at 53 degrees north. In Canada at 55 degrees north there are polar bears. Australia is wider than the moon. There are 14 mountains over the height of 8,000 meters. All of them are in Asia. Despite Canada being the US's neighbor to the north, the majority of Canadians live south of Seattle. The distance between New Zealand and Australia is roughly the same as the distance between the Netherlands and Libya. Came up in this thread comparing chocolate milk around the world. One Redditor made the assertion that NZ's choc milk was probably as bad as Australia's, because of the proximity of the two countries. Edit, I feel like /u/Thepoonies should get credit for pointing this out. Texas is large enough that I could fit Copenhagen, Brussels, Zagreb, and Warsaw with their real-life distances from each other inside the state lines. The Great Lakes contain enough fresh water to flood an area the size of Great Britain in over 100 meters of water. Rubies and sapphires are in fact the same mineral, and both of them, as well as emeralds, are actually rarer than diamonds. California is the closest state to Hawaii, but Hawaii is the furthest state from California. My parents in Canada live closer to me in England than they do to my in-laws in Canada. Not Earth's geography but Mars. Mount Olympus, volcano on Mars, is so big that it curves with the curvature of Mars itself to an extent that you cannot see the peak of the volcano if you would stand at the base of it. Reno, Nevada is farther west than Los Angeles, California. If you took a boat out of Reykjavik and sailed directly south, the first land mass you'd hit would be Antarctica. France's longest border is with Brazil. Canada has more lakes than the rest of the world combined. Alaska is simultaneously the furthest west, east, and northern point in the US. Antarctica is the world's largest desert, since it doesn't get all that much rainfall. Also, if you put a cherry on top of it, Antarctica is the world's largest desert. When I worked for FedEx back in the 90s, one of the reasons why they chose Anchorage as a global hub, apart from the fact that aircraft use less fuel due to it being cooler, was that it is one of the only places in the world that is within 10 hours of the three biggest global markets, North America, Europe and Asia. Who would have thought that a place considered in the middle of nowhere is actually the center of the world? Although I'm on the other side of the planet, only one country separates me from North Korea. Australia is the only continent with no active volcanoes. Canada has the longest coastline in the world at approximately 243,042 kilometers. It's estimated that it would take more than 30 years to walk Canada's coastline at the rate of 19 kilometers a day. Russia and America are so close. Whenever I look on a map, they are on opposite sides, but they are so much closer. I know, I am an idiot. Puerto Rico's easternmost point is further away from Key West than Key West is to Canada. Depending on where you are, you might have recently noticed a lot of dust from Africa coating your town. But dust from the Sahara regularly makes its way to the Amazon. In fact, without that dust, the Amazon might not even exist. The soil there is pretty nutrient poor, and that dust acts as a form of fertilizer. Two massive but opposing geological features, one full of life, the other very sparse, yet very strongly connected. Maine is the closest point in the US to Africa. There is actually a tiny strip of New Mexico that is directly north of the Texas Panhandle, contrary to the level of detail that many maps can show. Maine borders exactly one state. Tennessee and Missouri border 8 apiece. Half the world's population lives within 3,300 kilometers of Monket, Myanmar. Manila's population density is more than 100,000 people per square mile. In fact, the three densest cities in the world are all in the Philippines. The distance between the highest point and the lowest point in the contiguous United States is less than 85 miles. The Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal is west of the Pacific entrance. Another one is the location of the French Riviera. I always thought it was some tropical paradise. It's on pretty much the same latitude as Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Not mind-blowing, but my hometown Aberdeen, Scotland, is further north than Moscow. China has 14 neighboring countries. Alaska is actually huge. It's larger than Montana, Texas, and California combined. Yet, illustrated on maps as being tiny. How far north Europe is. I always pictured Europe as roughly parallel to the US, so northern Europe would be the same latitude as Minnesota and southern Europe as Florida. Not even close. The UK is almost entirely north of the lower 48 states, and Rome is further north than New York City. Ohio is the only state that doesn't share a letter with the word mackerel. The Appalachian mountain range formed before the North American continent broke away from Europe, so there's a little chunk of the Appalachians in France. Relatively speaking, we live on the skin of an apple. That's about how thick the Earth's crust is in proportion to its volume. The Australian tectonic plate is drifting north at a rapid rate relative to other plates. The whole continent is moving north and slightly clockwise at around 2.7 inches a year, which is fast enough that GPS systems have had to compensate for it to stay accurate. In a few 100 million years, Australia will probably collide with Asia, creating a mountain range even taller than the Himalayas when it does. It's also easy to forget how recent some of our research and discoveries are. Though the idea of continental drift was first proposed in 1915, the theory of plate tectonics wasn't really well developed until the 1950s, continuing into the 1970s. And while we currently understand pretty well that an asteroid impact caused most dinosaurs to rapidly go extinct, down to the exact location of the crater and the size of the asteroid and everything, the asteroid impact theory wasn't proposed until 1980. Perth is the most isolated metropolis in the world. Detroit is farther east than Atlanta. The Dead Sea is currently 429 meters below sea level, and sinking about 1 meter a year. I did some work in Jordan, and that caused some GPS receivers to mess up, as they thought the negative height was an error. The country that spans the most different time zones is France. Because they have so many islands and areas around the world that are considered French soil. Britain also has a bunch of overseas possessions that belong to the Crown, but unlike France they don't consider these places to be part of the same country. In Iceland, you can see where the North American tectonic plate and the Eurasia tectonic plate are moving away from each other. Another place that is similar, but not as intense, is Point Reyes National Seashore in California. It is separated by the San Andreas Fault, where the North American and Pacific plates come together. Bristol, Tennessee is closer to Canada than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. At high noon in Hawaii, when the sun is directly overhead, the shadows of objects evenly line up to make it look as if there are no shadows being cast, so objects planted in the ground would look like they're in a poorly rendered video game. This phenomenon is called a high noon, and it happens biannually. Greenland is further north, south, east, and west than Iceland. The Panama Canal actually runs north to south. Algeria is larger than Greenland. There's a glacier in Pakistan that's about the same latitude as Texas. Baltimore proper has more people than Wyoming does. Montpelier, the capital of Vermont, has less than 10,000 people. Asia has a larger surface area than Pluto. I just learned that Pangaea was not the only supercontinent. The geographical center of Canada is in Nunavut, north of the tree line at 62 degrees 24 N 096 degrees 28 W. The northernmost point in North America is in Greenland, which is technically Danish. I've always found it oddly cool that a European nation has the northernmost point somewhere outside of Europe. Britain as part of the UN has had control at one time or another of 171 out of the 193 United Nations. The Venus flytrap is native to an area roughly 60 miles around Wilmington, North Carolina. I thought it was some recently sea-covered Papua New Guinea plant. Russia's westernmost border and city in Europe is farther west than Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, and Bulgaria. The city is also farther west than Warsaw, Poland. Not really mind-blowing per se, but people forget about Kaliningrad Oblast, lol. For all the Finland/Bielefeld doesn't exist jokes, I'm surprised no one ever tried it with Kaliningrad given the weirdness of the oblast. Kaliningrad is closer to Berlin than Gusev is to Pskov or Smolensk. The most southern piece of land of Canada, Middle Island, is further south than the entirety of 13 US states, as well as partially of another 14. Also, even though it's located in Canada's territorial waters and always been a part of Canada, up until 2000 it was privately owned by the owner of an Ohio car dealership and was purchased by AskReddit, a private charity for $867,000 and donated to Parks Canada when he died. North Korea and Norway are only separated by one country,